Okay, this will be a quick discussion on the new sub-ascendancy, schizophrenic dissociation. So let's begin with the first line. This takes 40% less damage from hits, which is not prevention. It's less damage taken. And then the next line is 4 seconds after each hit you take, lose life equal to 40% of the damage taken from that hit. So basically, if you can take 100% of damage, you're gonna take 40% less. So you're gonna take 60% of the initial incoming damage. But then you're going to lose 40% of that hit. That's gonna be 40% of 60%, which is 24% damage instantaneous after 4 seconds. And the final line is non-clustered jewels socking passive tree have no effect. Now this line here right now is still ambiguous because we don't really know exclusively / explicitly whether you can put jewels into your cluster jewels. Some say yes, some say no. Some examples are going to be adorned. So initially, adorned did not apply to magic jewels in your cluster jewels, right? It didn't affect them. Some other things would be how things like impossible escape do not allow you to take nodes from, let's say, Eldritch Battery to the cluster jewel next to it. And of course, things like Thread of Hope and so on, they don't affect cluster jewels. So with this wording, there is a chance that it may still work, but in my opinion, it probably does not. Also, it's worth noting that they did say exclusively your passive tree. So when they said your passive tree, this is to emphasize that gems in your, let's say, abyssal jewels in your abyssal sockets should still work, but cluster jewels, we don't know. Now, let's first look at the situation of incoming damage when you don't have Petrified Blood. So on this graph here, we can see that currently, I'm going to use my mouse or bigger brush for pointer. Whoops, too big. Right. This is our total incoming damage. And this is our total HP. So make sure you keep it in mind that it is separate, right? So this will raise our max hit by a significant margin. You're going to go from 100% total HP at 6% damage taken. Now, incoming damage, 40% here is less damage. So it's already been, let's just say for now, reduced. Okay, which means you're going to take 60% of the incoming hits, which is why I drew the line at 60% here, right? Keep in mind, for this scenario, we're going to treat it as 1 hit and you'll be left alive at 1 HP. So things to note, because you're taking 40% less damage, you do not get full recoup value, right? Recoup value here is, in fact, at 0.6 ratio. Now, the reason why it's important is because many people have suggested that if you use items like the 5-ray chest, the 100% recoup chest, you could recoup all your life, but just keep in mind that it's going to be at less effectiveness because it will only recoup damage you actually take, right? So with that in mind, after 4 seconds, you're going to lose 24% of your actual HP. So, sorry, 24% of the actual damage, right? But this is 24% true damage taken relative to total incoming damage. But when you combine this to your actual HP, it is a significant amount, right? Because 24% of 60 is still 40% of your HP. So you're going to lose 40% of HP instantaneously. Now, these green lines I briefly drew as ways you can mitigate it other than recoup. Now, remember, leech is capped at 20% per second maximum without any further adjustments, right? Without having increased life leech and so on. And you cannot use partial leech, which I'll get into in a bit. So, over 4 seconds, you can leech at most 80% of your life, right? And that's excluding partial instant leech. So we're going to heal, and also this leech is relative to your max HP. You're going to heal your HP up to 80% current. Then this area here, or this arrow, should be transposed down to this line and then chunked down, right? And then your leech from this situation, or from this duration, for the next 1 second, will leech another 20%. So leech alone, by default, is not enough to sustain this incoming damage. Now, that's only for one hit though. What happens if you take multiple hits? Then you can quickly see that your leech will not be able to keep up with the incoming damage. You can use partial instant leech. Partial instant leech allows you to have both max default leech rate and instant leech at the same time. But this will require leech amounts that are absolutely extraordinary. And don't forget that currently, you have to be hitting something to leech, right? If you're fighting a monster 4 seconds ago, you've killed it, but you took a big chunk. Your leech is only going to last up to 5 seconds since then, assuming no other monsters. So an example with this will be killing a boss, phasing a boss, killing a rare, phasing a boss, right? And now, if you do not have enough recovery after 4 seconds, or 5+ seconds too, then damage incoming that's further prevented later on will just straight up kill you, because there's no recovery. Recoup can of course offset this, but recoup is over 4 seconds. So after your 4 seconds of recoup is up, any recovery rate after this 4 seconds must be dealt by some other means, right? Because recoup you can't recoup over 5 seconds. So this is the situation for no Petrified Blood by default. In my opinion, I think this is going to be a very, very difficult to use node, because the instantaneous loss of life after 4 seconds is going to make it very, very spiky. And not to mention that even if you're at risk more often than not, okay? That's how I see it. I feel like you're exposing yourself to more risk over time, on average, and that you trade off by getting a huge max hit benefit. I would also like to point out that most people who are going to use this node will not be using this node to gain max hit far above their normal max hits. Most people will use this node as like a band-aid. They're going to use this node to gain max hits up to the minimum required amount, meaning that multiple big hits will straight up kill your character after 4 seconds. So overall, I think without actually testing in game, my first initial thoughts are this is going to be very clunky. You could also alleviate some issues with, let's say, Defiance of Destiny. That should be pretty good, but I'm finding it hard to utilize. Also, let's go over some other ways of recovery rates besides leech and recoup. So one classic example is untiring. Untiring is Juggernaut's fizz recovery node basically, and maybe most people will use it in conjunction with Bone Shatter. Now, because this node says 40% less damage taken, you're already at a 0.6 times multiplier to your fizz damage recovery, assuming it's a fizz hit. Because remember that less damage taken is not prevention, right? It has to be damage reduction, reduced damage taken, additional reduction, and so on to count as reduction to physical damage, and so on. Also, golden rule, that's a jewel. So if jewels don't work, that won't work either. So of course with stasis getting well over like 150 recoup does seem okay, but keep in mind that if you do get like over a huge amount of recoup, you might be gaining life at a rate such as like this, right? You're recouping over time like this. You're hitting twice your HP. 100%, let's say 180% here. If you're relying on recoup, you can already tell right now that in this duration of time, you are at extraordinary risk of dying because your life is low and you have no way of recovering. So, again, that's why I think this is going to be a little tricky to utilize. I'm not saying it's bad. Definitely not. I'm just saying it's tricky. And also, if you do take hits after, say they do a big hit now here, if this is now recouped over time, it won't last long enough for the full duration. It's only 4 seconds, right? It's 4 seconds. And you're taking your damage and you need to recoup damage after 5 seconds. So after 4 seconds to the 5th, 6th, and 7th second. Remember? So if you recoup this amount here, then this life loss is not recouped, right? There is no recoup for this part. Okay. And now moving on to Petrified Blood. Save. I think Petrified Blood is perhaps even clunkier to use than no PB. Okay. So let's assume you can use Blood Notch and you can use that recovery. If you look here, you can see, right, that when you... So I know that this graph's shown a little bit different. This is the damage prevented, right? And this is your actual HP at 55%. And there are approximates here because I make it easy for calculations. If you Blood Notch heal this amount here, right, then this 30% recoup will only offset the Petrified Blood deferred damage. It will never see the prevented damage from 40% less, right? This 40% less is never seen by either PB or Blood Notch or recoup. So it's basically isolated, okay? As we mentioned earlier. That means that after 4 seconds, you're taking a full 24% true life loss, unpreventable, instantaneously, right? And the reason why it's bad for Petrified Blood is because your actual HP is still capped at 55%, even though you're losing 24% max HP instantaneously. Or sorry, yeah, 24%. So then you're going to be at 31 over 55% HP-ish. That's 31 over 55. Around 56% max life from a 40% deferred. So it's actually worse than it actually is, right? And again, how do you recover life afterwards, right? This life here has to be recovered somehow besides this recoup here and any duration from the initial hits. It is going to be very, very hard. So the one way I do think you can use this is by having unreserved life. So PB reserved on mana, and also running a Defiance of Destiny. And then in that situation, maybe you can get around running around with low life. But again, because this is life loss instantaneously, if you stack up enough damage up front, kill your monsters around you, and then after 4 seconds, nothing's around you to sustain or recover. Boom! You have no recovery left, and you're dead. So, and even Defiance won't work against life loss like that. So, overall, my thoughts are that this node might be a bit of a bait. Mainly because I find it excruciatingly hard to recover life after the 4th second in most situations, because you can't use recoup. Leech barely works, and instant leech will almost rarely be enough unless you have billions of DPS. Or in that case, if you have billions of DPS, I don't think having a bit more max hit is too big of a deal. And that is my initial thoughts regarding the Schizophrenic Dissociation. I will mention it briefly on my guide, which is in the progress right now, so it'll be out soon. There's a lot to do for that, so please bear with me for a little bit, and bear with Linear, and remember to thank Linear, because Linear is doing so much of the work for me. Thank you so much, and I will see you very soon for the guide. Ciao.